Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and I'm super excited about today's episode. Today's guest has got more than 8 years in IT with great leadership skills. He's obsessed about adding value to a company and is currently the program manager of change management at Amazon. Please welcome Ashish Nangia. Hello.
Hey, Justin. Thank you for having me.
Really good to have you here today. And like we always do, I want to start off asking the big question. What is the biggest challenge you see facing the deskless frontline workforce today?
No, that's a great question to kick off the podcast. The biggest challenge which I see facing the deskless workforce right now is making them feel more valued and wanted. And what I mean specifically by that is where the companies are heading with the remote work, that is mostly done for people who have desk jobs or who are with technology teams or who are having um, any other profile within the company, whether it's supply chain, inventory, but those are desk jobs which are being moved to remote. Uh, what has not been taken into consideration is the thought process and uh, the feelings that somebody who's at the front end who doesn't have that flexibility goes through. And I think as a leader and as bigger companies, I think those thought processes are now being thought of at the front end, and some of the changes are coming through. If you see like offering education or funding college tuition and so on. So the biggest challenge is how do you make them feel more valued, and so that it's a level playing field for everybody in the organization.
Man, right out of the gate, you've already hit a nerve for me. This is one of the topics I'm most passionate about lately. In that I just think there's so much talk about Zoom fatigue and remote work and trying to find some balance with hybrid work environments and all these other things. And there are legitimate reasons for that debate. But I think exactly as you said, what they leave out from that conversation is the roughly 80% of the global workforce for whom that doesn't apply, right? And man, it just drives me crazy. And I just worry that we're spending so much time worrying about how traditional office workers are going to navigate, this new blended environment or whatever those scenarios are going to be. And anytime we're spending on that, we're not spending thinking about what's the impact to the men and women on the front line. And so I agree with you completely. And I'm really comforted to hear you talk about that. I do think you bring up some really good points, and it does seem to be shifting a little bit now. I think the hiring challenge has made everyone more aware of saying, hey, we can't treat them like the redheaded stepchildren anymore, right? We've got to bring this front and center now and make it a serious part of our strategy.
Exactly right. I think companies are thinking and recognizing the fact that they will not have people to work on the front line if they continue to follow the same policies and procedures, and even by bumping pay by 5%, 10% is just not enough. There has to be a holistic approach, whether with what technology they use or with a mindset. It needs to be a mindset shift at the leadership end. And those 80% of the workforces, as you said, they have to be in the center stage for any policy or any thought of cultural changes that the companies need to make.
Yeah. Fantastic way to start this conversation. So thank you for that. Let's get to know you a little bit more. I know the audience really wants to get to know our guests and understand, your background. So tell us a little bit about, going back maybe all the way to, university and where you ended up going to school, and then how you kind of advanced through your career up until now.
So I did my bachelor's in India, and finished it off in 2011. And after that, I started for working for a company known as eBay, so a e-commerce giant. But I was working there as a contractor through a very big technology company known as HCL Technologies. they are almost $11 billion enterprise now, a very huge enterprise. And I was mostly involved with their business analysis, systems analysis, implementing new technologies to integrate eBay's ERP system, whether it's merchandise management system or warehouse management system. So typically, all the work that business analysts do, writing specs, documents, and from there on, I moved on to Sports Authority. From 2012 to 2016, I was there for almost 4 years, again through HCL, and that was the first time I traveled to the US for the client. But Sports Authority got bankrupt in 2016,
Yep.
so I decided to go back to school and finish my master's in something which I'm extremely passionate about, which is management information system, which is aligning technology with business. So how does technology help in channelizing businesses, whether it's through apps or through new functionalities or new features or new products? So I studied there for 9 months. I finished a 2-year program in 2 semesters and then quickly geared
That's
up.
impressive.
Thank you. I started in a startup then just to understand the culture known as Vantage Solutions in Chicago. From there, shifted gears, moved on to XPO Logistics, worked there into program management as well as some business analysis, and did some very cool stuff there in implementing some robotic stuff. And I'm sure we are going to talk in detail about that part. And from there, I got another opportunity to lead a team and do more technical stuff at Ashley Furniture Industries. And there I was handling, again, their technology part, but manufacturing systems. So integrating their order management, manufacturing systems with warehouse management. So those transfers, those return to vendors orders, and those manufacturing things were pretty cool at Ashley. And
I definitely want to come back to that part. So I know we'll spend some time on that
sure.
piece and your experience around that. But I definitely want our audience to know about your current role and where you're at today.
Sure, sure. So it's been a year and a month now. I've been at Amazon. I finished my 1 year mark in September, and I'm working here as a program manager in change management space. So anything related to changes that happen in launches or facilities at Amazon, they go through our team, my team, and my team's name is Configuration and Change Management Team, and I'm a part of the change management space there. So I help Amazon plan ahead about the changes that need to happen in next year or probably 3 years in advance.
It's fantastic. So Amazon is one of many favorite companies, but of the two that probably get the most of my discretionary income, it's Apple and Amazon. So thrilled to hear that you work there, and just some of the stories that you were sharing with me. When we were preparing for today's conversation, just about the sheer scale of change inside an organization like Amazon, it's just really mind-boggling, right? You were sharing stories just about, just even just changing out workstations, and all the consideration that has to go into those workstations. Can you maybe share another story just to help get the scale and explain to the audience
Exactly.
when you're looking at those changes, what you have to consider?
No, that's a good point. So, for example, even if you're changing a tape at a fulfillment center or a warehouse facility, so those tape changes have to be approved by safety, whether they will come in walking way of a frontline worker or whether they would hinder any operational work. So there has to be a rigorous process that need to be followed, and then the scale of the chain needs to be understood. So if we are doing it for one facility and it is great, then why don't we do it for all the facilities that we have? And how do we inculcate that in future launches then, if that is the right change for the company? So those things have to be thought out, and cost benefit analysis plus the, if it's a safety concern, then it has to be addressed, and we have to make sure that it is across the board we are doing it and following a proper cadence for it, so that the frontline workers ability to make their incentives doesn't get diminished by any change. But safety is the priority for Amazon for its employees.
It's good to hear. And that's a great example of just the impact. So I know in the case, of Amazon and some of the changes that you might oversee, they don't necessarily involve technology, but they still do speak to just the overall change saturation, how much change is happening inside the organization. And again, at Amazon, just the scale at which that change has to happen across all of your facilities. It's really a pretty amazing thing to think through.
Yes, it is.
So let's go back to what we talked about in the beginning, frontline workers, them feeling more valued, and you hit on something, and this is a question I really like to explore with a lot of our guests. Um, and I think you've already kind of answered it to some extent. What do you think has changed for frontline workers throughout the pandemic, or do you think anything has changed? I know it's changed for office workers. We talked about that, remote work and Zoom fatigue and all those other things. But do you think things have changed much during the pandemic for what we would characterize as frontline workers?
I think with pandemic, things have changed for everyone, and frontline workers are, we cannot say things have not changed for them. It has changed for them. It's a mental challenge as well now, added to the physical work that they have to do being on the front line, because they don't have the comfort or the flexibility of, okay, I'm gonna logged in from home today, or I'm gonna log in from 2 to 5 instead of 9 to 12. So those things, plus think about the families that they have to take care, and their kids who are not going to school, or who were not going to school because of the lockdowns and the shutdowns. So a lot of things have changed, and I'm hoping we are on the other side of the bridge now, and we are just crossing it. And even if we will have some hiccups, those will be small. But yeah, for frontline workers, I think it's a mindset change now, or or a more pressure now because of the pandemic, what they had to go through, and they still have to report to work. So probably things would be more tough.
Ashish, you've done a great job of explaining that in a way that makes me think I need to rethink how I ask the question. Because what we're kind of saying on one hand is that nothing has changed. They still had to go work at a facility. They still have to go drive a truck to do a delivery, right? All those things are kind of the same, and that's part of what I'm pointing out. But you raise a really good point that they are doing that inside a completely different world than they were doing it before, right? So their job may be the same. They may be doing the same things inside a distribution center, fulfillment center, or riding a truck route, but they're doing it in an entirely different context than they were before. And one of the things that you just said, which I'm incredibly sensitive to, is that these men and women that are still having to go out and do their jobs away from their home still have kids doing remote school from home, and all of the other challenges. So they've been faced with quite an additional burden, and they still have to get their same job done as they did before. And that's the part that I'm really sympathetic to. And I wonder how we, as many of the folks that work in the corporate offices, what we can be doing to ensure that they can still be successful throughout all of this change. And we have a heavy emphasis on digital transformations in my business, but I think that changes. You've helped to educate me to say that it's not just about digital change; it's about all of the change throughout the business.
No, that's a great point. And I think some of the things that you're alluding to or referring to, have been incorporated, and were incorporated in my previous company even before the pandemic hit at Ashley Furnitures, where we saw some of the operations manager having those dashboards and technology on their fingertips, so that they don't have to go into each assembly line to check same monotonous tasks that they were doing every hour, just to see the throughput, or the volume of production or the quality of furniture produced. There were some technology pieces fit in there, or some cameras and sensors which could tell them the exact weight of the furniture. And if, because we need to be consistent with the quality of furniture that we are producing at Ashley, right? So if a furniture needs to weigh 900 or 240 pounds, it cannot weigh 370 pounds, right? Like, there has to be some consistency. And minor things would happen if we are manually producing furniture. But at Ashley, we saw a lot of camera, sensor, and robotics being introduced in order to make life easier for the frontline workers, so that they don't have to uh, do the same monotonous task again and again, and it can be a help to increase their productivity and in turn increase their pay because a lot of them were incentivized.
So this is a great point, right? This speaks right to the heart of what this show should be all about. So we're talking about transformation, and you're talking about some of the motivations for implementing that technology. All of them are actually very favorable for the frontline workers that would be impacted. However, I'm not saying this is true at Ashley, but in many organizations, the frontline workers still feel like they are almost victims of some of this technology change. So share with us how you went about, how the organization went about explaining that the purpose of this technology, this innovation that we were bringing, is actually here to make things easier for you, to ensure that you can be successful, to help that you can make your incentive bonuses and stuff like that. Tell us about that change process.
That's a great question. And I will divide this part of the answer into two parts. The first one is explaining the frontline workers and creating a roadmap for them to finally move into higher roles and responsibilities. So if a frontline worker starts thinking about higher roles and responsibilities instead of losing their job or not feeling more secure, I think it is all about how leadership communicates those changes and how they make them feel welcomed and valued for those changes, because the biggest customer of any digital transformation are the frontline workers, because they have to not only collaborate with the technology but also integrate. Their workpiece is now going to be integrated as well, so they have to not only like it but also understand the bigger vision or bigger piece or how it is going to add up and make them have more time into maybe having a learning session every day, or spending that time in learning a new skill, or spending that time in learning about leadership and partnering with your teammates, how you can be a peer leader. So those kind of thought processes have to be incorporated into frontline workforce, and I think Ashley did a great job, because a lot of frontline workers were made to understand their growth map and their growth path. So once they understood it, they understood how this technology will help them go reach there faster by explaining to them how their productivity will increase, number one, and number two, how this will free up their time which they were using for the same monotonous task to peer lead their assembly line workers or their cross-functional partner teams.
That's such an amazing story, because so many times we hear that the pushback for implementing new technology is the efficiency, exactly as you just described, but without proper communication around that, what what many of the frontline workers believe is that this efficiency is going to eliminate my job, or it's going to eliminate, my buddy's job down the hall, right? And that actually creates a lot of fear and uncertainty around, hey, are we sure we really want to embrace this technology if it's going to create a threat, to us? And the story that you just shared was a fantastic example of how you can really turn that around to being actually a positive for them, and to answer the question, what's in it for them, right? So okay, so what? So you're more efficient, but what's in it for you as an individual? And you've done a great job of answering that question. So how did you, can you share any best practices with us about how you went about that communication, and how well it was received by those workers? And did you experience any challenges with that? I know that was a lot of question in there, but
No,
tell us a little bit more about how that happened.
that's a great question. I think it's about breaking down a bigger piece of meat into smaller pieces. And how we did it is, for example, when we implemented robotics or robotic arms at Ashley, which were used for putting down nails into a piece of furniture and then passing it on to another robotic arm. So how we communicated that is by implementing it on one assembly line first, and then proving with results and metrics how your peers who have embraced this technology are moving ahead of the ladder, and having a focus group of folks who were mostly trying to help understand the rest of the team the value. So breaking down the process to operations manager first, so that he understands how does it add value for my operation, and then making it drill down further to one assembly line. So once you have done it on one assembly line, you have metrics, you have data points, then you how do you increase it by bringing in more robotic arms rather than completely ordering 75 robotic arms which you don't know where you'll place, and then you're going to spend a lot of money in the integration. And within the one robotic arm, it's also good for technology teams to have lessons learned, to ensure that the integration is clean, neat, and systemically that information is flowing throughout the life cycle of, whether you're using a ERP or multiple systems. That information is going on from one system to another system, labels are being created properly, and the flow of material can be tracked within our ecosystem. So it is a win-win situation not only for frontline workers but also for technology teams. So breaking down the bigger piece into smaller pieces and then having your agents of change uh, be kind of your testimonial, with success at once. So, and these are big initiatives. These are not like day changes, right? Installing a robotic arm might sound simple, but once they get installed, that's where the real, game begins for the manufacturing facilities. And even at XPO Logistics, which was my prior company to Ashley, we had brought in third generation robots there who were integrated with how people were picking, packing, and shipping at logistic facilities. So I think the thought process or the framework remains the same. Go small, go slow in the beginning, have those metrics, have those results, let let customer or your people who are your frontline workers provide feedback, and take it in a positive manner. Don't think they just don't want to do it, so they're giving you that feedback. Go deeper than just the surface.
Man, you've just said a lot of good stuff that I want to peel apart there a little bit. The first is that you jogged a memory for me that I've been through a couple of projects where the customer teams did start fairly small, and it was so rewarding to see the shift in the beginning. The first location that might be the pilot location, we're saying things like, why do we have to be the first ones to do this, right? Why are you making us do this? And so that was kind of a negative response to being the first ones. But the real satisfaction for those of us on the technology side is when you see now the other solution, the other locations or the other groups say, when do we get to use that technology, right? Because they see the success that's happening in that pilot group. They now actually become envious of that. They fear it less because they're seeing that somebody else is getting to experiment and improve out the concept. And so now everybody else wants it. And that's a really powerful place for those of us in the technology and program management side to be, where that's really what we want. We want to make things better for all of the stakeholders. But a lot of times when we start a project, there's a force field around everybody, right? And so to find those methods to communicate with them and to start off small, I love that example of starting off small so that we can get that support, and then see it be pulled into those other groups. I think that's fantastic. Now, you didn't say this word or phrase, but it sounds like you did some type of after action review. Like it sounds like after you did the pilot, you did some kind of assessment. Did I hear that right?
Yes.
Tell,
So
tell, tell us a little bit more about that.
that's like retrospective. So
Yep.
in agile world or in software world, what were the lessons learned basically, what were the success stories, what worked, what did not work. So in one of the examples, when we had installed the machine which had to put in the nails, it was not putting on the number label on on those pieces. So the system did not know exactly where we are in the process of manufacturing a specific sofa, because the nail machine had forgot to put in the labels, which was a big miss. But once we fixed it, the counters were still not working, if I need to go more technical. So those kind of things were more of, lessons learned or retrospectives at a high level. At a more granular level, we even calculated efficiency per minute and how fast were we actually getting in terms of producing furniture. So some of the numbers that we saw, that we were able to manufacture with 75% more efficiency and 70% more accuracy
Wow.
for a specific piece of sofa. So we had to order robotic arms specific to what kind of, piece we were manufacturing for, right? So there were specific use cases which were studied, which were learned, and the results were really great. But retrospective was a part of the complete process. Once you install something, you learn.
You're also reminding me of something that I've heard from a lot of the guests on the show, which is that if there are glitches in the technology, it makes end user adoption that much more difficult, right? And that makes sense. Any of us would get frustrated. So, there's even if we've done it right, there's been a lot of communication about the change. These are the ways that it's going to impact your business, and then or a day in your life, and then you take on this new technology or this enhancement to the technology, and something doesn't work right. That's pretty frustrating for the end users and for the project team, obviously. But for the end users that we're trying to persuade to say, hey, this is actually going to make things better, it doesn't always work as well out of the gate as we hope it will, does it?
Yeah, that is so true. I think the major selection part of end users here, the kind of people whom we chose were top performers. So what happened is they were pretty secure of their space at Ashley or at XPO. So what that does is, if you're feeling secure about where you are in the company, and you have a vision for yourself where you see yourself in a couple of years or a year as a leader, you it's not about if, it's about when you start embracing these technologies. So they were pretty patient with us as technology teams, and they were ready to spend that time in the beginning because they knew the fruits would be amazing at the end. So it's about having the right focus groups, as I said earlier, and having them, unpack these problems with you rather than just being, okay, this is not working. So they were very collaborative and in providing that feedback, and it all boils down to explaining them the why of the process really well rather than the how. So we didn't discuss about the results that we'll be getting, but we were trying to explain the thought process, because it is, we are not going to get technology in a box yet. We all know that, but we will get there. At least one day, whether it's 2040, 45, 50. So there has to be some steps, and people have to start reskilling, getting reskilled to learn. Uh, Other skills which are very important in today's day and age, and which will be more relevant in the futures to come.
Well, and I think it all kind of goes back to some things that you said at the top of the conversation, which is making them feel more valued, right?
Exactly.
And and then you talk a lot from a change management perspective about communication. And one of the best ways that we can make people feel more valued is communicating, right? So we can be more articulate, more thoughtful about how we're communicating with them. And I love that there should be, I love your point that there should be an emphasis on why we're making these changes. What's the impact going to be to you before we start talking about the robotic arms and the other things? Why are we making these changes, and how is that going to contribute to your development as an employee in this organization, right? And I think if I've learned one thing throughout all these change management conversations that we've been having on the podcast, it's made me realize that, as I'm making a big generalization here, but I think across all the technology implementations that I've seen, I think we're just not communicating well enough. We're not communicating frequently, early enough in the process. And I think we could solve a lot of problems and make things a lot better for everyone if we just got out ahead of it. And frankly, that's true of probably any relationship that we have, that you might have with an employee, with a team member, with a coworker, whatever the case may be, or with a spouse. Being early and often about communication is always going to make things better.
Completely agreed. I think
Yeah.
I'm completely aligned. It's about, I think with technology teams and other challenges, we tend to overestimate on, how fast we can deliver, uh, without taking into account a lot of challenges which can happen on the ground. So
Yeah.
if there is a big order to fulfill, right, and we have to stall the project for 3 days, it will happen. It's not going to wait, okay, we are going to get the robotic arm and it's going to fast track. If there is a order in hand to fulfill to a big client or customer, whether it's Ashley, XPO, or any other company that I've worked for, we will go ahead and finish the order first before we continue with the testing. That will take a back burner. So I think technology teams have to be better, as you said, in communicating early and keeping it engaged. It's a combined effort.
Yeah.
It's like making a dream team, creating those group chats, or those Zoom groups, Chime groups, or any platform you use, and making people hear them out, what customers really are feeling, what they are wanting. I think giving them a platform is extremely important. I meant end users like
Yeah,
frontline workers, operations managers, and everything.
sure. Yeah, no, I think that's really good. You talked about being over optimistic, that the technology teams tend to be over optimistic about the timelines. And I think you're spot on. I mean, every project you see, some things come up that were unexpected, no matter how much we plan for risk and everything else. And we have to consider the impact that that has on our internal customers, right? Those end users. They lose faith in us. So here we are telling them if we're doing a good job, we're communicating, just like we said before, about all these changes that are going to happen. And then we hit some, roadblocks, and that reduces their confidence about the success of this. I had a great experience actually recently, and you just described this kind of worker that was very comfortable in his role. So we were implementing, and there's a lot of speculation that the older guys on the floor are going to be more reluctant to embrace technology, and the young men and women are going to be faster to adopt. And we were out on site with a customer one day, and I saw the exact opposite. We were rolling out the new technology, and there was an older gentleman who was deep into his career, and he grabbed the new mobile device and he said, guys, I'm going to tell you how this is all going to work. Yes, there are going to be a bunch of problems that are going to happen, but we're going to get through it together. And it was kind of just funny to see that, because he had been through probably 5 generations of this technology over the course of his career in this company. He knew that if they said they were going to go live on October 1st, it wasn't really going to happen until December 1st. So he was already prepared for that. It didn't phase him at all. And he was actually coaching the younger men and women that were in the office or in this depot to say, hey, here's what you should expect from this experience. And to your point, he was so comfortable in his role that he didn't feel threatened by the technology. It didn't give him any anxiety. And it actually freed his mind, I think, to be able to now learn the new technology without having to worry about it. And so in that case, he felt that way just because of all of his experience. But hopefully we can convey those stories to other folks that are learning, to say, yeah, are there going to be hiccups along the way? Probably so. And I can't tell you what they are, because if they are, I would have avoided them. but
Exactly.
I think that's a really interesting point that just really helps to build their confidence and say, hey, we're kind of in this together. Let's make the best of it, and we're going to be here to support you the best way that we can.
No,
So
completely aligned.
next thing I want to just kind of ask you about is maybe on the other side. So we've talked about a lot of the examples that you've shared with us today have been super positive examples of really how to do things well. I'm wondering, you don't have to mention any proper names, maybe, if we want to, keep those to yourself, but just maybe some circumstances that didn't go quite as well, where the change management and the implementation, didn't go as well as expected, and perhaps any lessons that you learned from that experience.
Yeah, that definitely. You have some good experiences, but you also have some learning experiences, as I call them, right? Like where you could have done better job. I think as my career has progressed, I've learned one thing is it is extremely important for the IT teams, to now take the ownership. And when they say 1st October, it shouldn't be 1st December. We should rather first say 1st December rather than 1st October. So a similar kind of incident happened with us when we were launching a point of sale system for one of my clients, Sports Authority. And while we were launching that system, I think one of a major challenge which happened is they were giving errors or issues on gift cards, and that wasn't tested through. So, and that was during a season where we expect a lot of gift cards because the company has handed them over. So with that POS system, uh, people on boots on the ground at the store, people were having issues. Now, what do they do? If people come with gift cards, you cannot tell them it's not getting scanned, right?
Yeah.
It has to happen. And customer doesn't care. You change SAP or you change any other technology system for them. You show me the $15 off coupon, right? And I'm the same. So there was some lesson learned about that the change could have done better. And one of the major factor for that was overcommitment, as I brought it up earlier. So we were trying to meet a tight deadline, and we did meet the deadline, but we didn't look for all use cases. And some of the gift cards were working, but we did not turn on the counters for few, because you have to be very safe and secure when it comes to gift card, because there is a lot of fraud which
A fraud.
happens.
Yeah, sure.
Exactly. So there were some code changes which were made, and the problem lasted just for a couple of days. But imagine the number of orders and people who had to face the consequences, on the ground, because every customer is going to went out on store manager or on the person who is scanning.
On that retail associate that's standing there right at the front
Exactly.
lines.
And
Yeah.
it's not their fault. So an apology email was sent out, and people were told about the problem, how we have fixed it, clear communication company wide. The problem was solved in a couple of days. But that was a big lesson learned, of why technology team has to take more ownership now, because they are no more a separate group now. They are an integral part of every company, and companies are ready to spend millions and millions of dollars in order to help. Technology needs to help channelize business, simple. So they need to come up with a way, like think about a store launch. If a store launch says we are going to launch on Friday, you will not see them launching on Sunday, right? So they have such critical deadlines. I think that's where, with the technology piece, whether it's for frontline or even if it's for office, within your office there is a change that you're rolling out, you have to start working backwards from the launch date and ensure what needs to be done to meet that date. And if we are not meeting the date, how do we communicate early and more effective?
Yeah, no, you're making a lot of great points in there, and I think as I think about you describing the deadlines and how we often push to perhaps some unreasonable timelines, and we don't have enough padding in the project plan, it does create just a tremendous amount of stress on everybody in the project. The thing, and I've told this story on the show now probably a half a dozen times, that I was out riding a route with a guy in a delivery organization, and he shared with me the emotion that he has about all these technology changes. Is he says, you don't understand, I'm standing in front of the customer and I feel like I'm on an island because everybody else that's involved in this isn't around when something doesn't work right. And I will never forget the conversation that I had with that guy, Eric, that day, because his description of saying that he feels like an island tells me a lot about what was going on in his mind and his heart. The isolation that he felt when he was the one having to face the store manager when he's trying to do a delivery and something's not working right in the technology. And in your example, the point of sale system, you're standing there in a store, you got a mom or a dad and they've got their two kids there and they're trying to just use the $15 gift card to get out of the store, and something's not working right, and that retail associate's taking the earful about that, and they are the one person in the entire organization that had no ability to affect that circumstance, but they're the ones that are standing on an island by themselves getting an earful. And it's not fair to them, and I think they have a much tougher job than we probably give them credit for a lot.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about, you've got some amazing histories, and I really appreciate you sharing a lot of those. I'd love to hear how you develop. I've sensed from the pre-call that you and I had together to prepare for today and today's conversation, you're very focused on your professional development. How do you learn new things? What events are you hoping to go to in this? As hopefully things are kind of on the downturn from COVID. How do you learn professionally? You're certainly very academic focused with a master's degree and things like that, but how are you learning to keep up on new skills for your profession?
That's a great question. I think I try to learn more holistically these days, not just about program management, but digital transformation. So I think LinkedIn Learning is a great source.
Mhm.
It doesn't cost a lot of money as well, but I have few specific leaders for any field that I want to learn about. So for example, if it's teamwork, then I will not only try like to learn from CEOs, but also from a sports team or a coach of a sports team who is handling 18 to 21 age of players who are young, who are energetic. So if you can maneuver them to work as a team and give them that mindset, you can definitely, lead a team of your own who have done their bachelor's or who are in their early 20s or, in fact, even late 20s. So those kind of different mentors for entrepreneurship or leadership or team management. So for motivation, I like to listen to podcasts similar to what you're doing. I have specific people like Patrick Bet David for entrepreneurship and Joe Rogan for a lot of
A
things
little
when
bit
it
of
comes.
everything.
Exactly, exactly, and especially physical motivation. So I think Studying about nutrition, exercise is also extremely important to keep those right hormones flowing and staying positive. But the resources can be YouTube, LinkedIn, YouTube channels, as well as podcasts. But it's variety. I want to bring in that diversity, equality, and inclusion perspective to anything and everything I think about. And that's why I was so excited about this podcast, because this gives me a new tangent of thought process. Though I was already thinking about these things, but now it will be in the center of every project that I take. How do I serve my frontline workers? Because if they get served, then we will take care of the rest of us, because there are a lot of people thinking about us anyways.
That is exactly the motivation for the podcast. And I think I'm very similar to you. I really enjoy learning through podcasts and other, my wife makes fun of me about the amount of time I spend on YouTube now, because I have all these channels that I follow and there's such amazing content and I'm just constantly learning new things. And I can't get enough of it. And so when we thought
Exactly.
about, well, how do we raise the awareness of the challenges that frontline workers are facing as it relates to this digital transformation that always seems to be happening, we said, well, why don't we create our own podcast? And so it's great to have you on the show. I hope you'll become a listener. I know the rest of our listeners are going to find a lot of value in the conversation that we had today. So really enjoy you being here, and thank you for that. I do want to ask you before we go here. Give me a sense for, you've done a lot of work around technology. You've got a deep background. Your entire career has basically been around technology as an analyst and as an implementer and program manager of technology. What do you love most about working with technology?
I think that's the part of the role that I'm in, like change. So nothing is constant. Only thing constant in anything and everything that I'll do in my career is going to be change. So embracing new challenges with technology. So the robotic arm might become obsolete in the next 5 years or 7 years, right? What's the next big thing that we need to overtake? And what is the next big product that we can create to make life easier for our customers? So technology wise, specifically the rate and pace of change with newer softwares, newer products, newer backend codes. Now the teams are promoting technologies where you don't even have to write code, right? Codeless frameworks. And I'm very big into framework, whether it's technology piece, life, health, nutrition. You
Yeah.
need to develop a framework which works for you and your team, and then just plug and play, right? Like just have those basics there, and it's whether it's any technology, it will work. So
Yeah.
those are the things I'm really passionate about.
I find that change and innovation to be very stimulating as well. I get bored
Great.
with status quo. And so I much like you, I just appreciate, the pace of change with technology, and it's really fascinating. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some disadvantages. What would you say maybe are some of the things that you don't like about working with technology?
I think it's changing too fast. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Like
Yeah.
there has to be some time given to the frontline workers or our customers to adapt to it. And sometimes we are over fixing things. So, for example, I had an email yesterday for my apartment's residential portal. They are changing it. And when I asked them, hey, what problem did we solve? Because I was able to pay the bill, and why did we change the UI? And apparently the team did not have an answer. Maybe it was an IT change. They had a bigger vision. So again, either the teams are not communicating well to the frontline workers or the customers, or we're just doing it for the sake of doing it so that we don't stay left behind. So it's a double-edged sword. It has to be used. Technology is at the end of the day there to channelize business, unless we are doing anything very disruptive or innovative, which is not the case for 95% of the things that we are changing, right? For 5% of things, it makes absolute sense to go with the pace of change, make that change happen, but not for 100% of things that we are changing. So keeping that balance, understanding the customer problem we are trying to solve, and keeping customer at the heart of anything and everything that we do. It has to solve a business problem. So in words of some of the leaders is, if it doesn't add value, it does not make sense. So let's not do it.
That's perfectly said. At first blush, it would sound like you're kind of contradicting yourself between your favorite part and your least favorite part. But I understand the point of your comment is that it's really about finding balance and making sure that the innovation makes sense. And as you said, that there is significant business value there to justify the change, or it doesn't make sense doing. And that's tough, is especially in massive organizations like you work for today and that you've worked for previously. There's a lot of different pressures coming from different parts of the organization because everybody's got changes that they want to see implemented and maybe some politics involved. So it's a tough place to be. But I think, kind of circling back around to our focus on the frontline workers, I think one of the expressions I've learned from all these change management conversations has been about change saturation. That's an expression that wasn't on the tip of my tongue a few months back. It is now. And it is because I put myself in the shoes of those frontline workers and I say, all these different groups around the organization are trying to implement just one small thing. But to the individual that's on the receiving end of that, it's a lot of things that are happening, right? And in the context, as you brought up early in the discussion, in the context of all the things going on in the world, their kids are working from home, their spouse isn't working, right? All these other things that are going on. There's a lot for them to digest. And, we owe it to them. We owe it to the business to be sensitive to those things and make sure that we can help them be successful on those transitions.
I'm sure with initiative and podcasts like yours, it will eventually make a difference. And it's all about doing our part and having that unconscious, we all have that unconscious bias.
Yep.
So let's be conscious about it and start thinking about our frontline workers with any and every change we make, and it will create a difference in the end.
Yeah, I agree. Well, man, I really have enjoyed this conversation. I knew that we would. So thank you very much for joining today. I do need to wrap it up there. I hope the audience has found this conversation as enjoyable as I have. If so, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the website at skillful.com. That's SKYLLFUL.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share your story. And we'll see you on our next episode. Thanks for joining today.